some of the grows are huge. And I know in the US and around the Great Lakes in Canada and the US, there on the border, they've been measuring cannabinoid concentrations in the environment, in the water, in the rivers. And we're very worried. We've got farms here in Australia, 100 hectares, 400 hectares, some of them, which drain right into our biggest water table here, the Murray-Darling system, which is, if you've got 400 hectares of cannabis growing in a field, then they're going to drop leaves, they're going to drop stalks, they're going to drop, these things. Plants have a lot of debris and detritus grubs up. And that ends up washing away during a storm or when there's rain into the main water table. So now the main water table is contaminated. Australia, it tends to be arid. We've got a lot of arid land in this country, as you probably know. So when it's dry, the water table falls and the rivers don't run very fast. In fact, our biggest river, the Murray-Darling, often doesn't have water going out the bottom because of the irrigation, right? So that's how dry we get. We get really dry. But if there's all these cannabinoids pumped in the system, the cannabinoids are coming in and there's no water going out, the concentration is going up, right? Now, so the question is, in the Midwest, they tell me that the Farm Bill, which was, I think, 1998 in the US, something like that, was nearly $1 million. And a lot of that was designed to rehabilitate tobacco farmers and help them out. And they were going to go to hemp. And hemp was supposed to be okay because it was less than, I think, in the US, 0.2% THC. But the point is, the rest of it would be other cannabinoids. And my point is, the other cannabinoids are genotoxic too, sorry, right? And the 2%, the 0.2%, that's actually wrong. There's studies, papers published in Nature Communications, one of the top medical journals of the world, saying that the assays they use to measure that 0.2% themselves are wrong by a factor of 7 to 10-fold. So this whole thing, right? And in fact, they were feeding that hemp to cows, and the cows couldn't produce their milk because they were too stoned to eat and too stoned to move, and their eyes got bloodshot, and they just stood there with drool coming out of their mouth because they're eating the hemp, not the THC, just the hemp. Scary that cows eating hemp get too stoned and can't make their milk, so they decided it wasn't a good idea. But they also decided if they fed that milk from those cows to babies would get above whatever the recommended safety level of THC was from eating the cows that fed the hemp. But remember, the assay of the hemp is out by nearly 10-fold. So this whole thing that 0.2% is fine and kosher is wrong. And I think in Europe it's 0.3%, but the assays themselves are broken. But the point is, you've got like there's, I think between Tennessee and Kentucky, now this caught our attention. We wrote about holes in the heart, right? The top part of the heart has 2 atria and 2 ventricles. 2 atria at the top, 2 ventricles at the bottom. And between the 2 atria, you can get a thing called atrial septal defect. And we wrote about that about 4 or 5 years ago. And we were very worried because in Kentucky at the time, the rate was 320 per 10,000 births. This was what the CDC was publishing their rates. Now, they said the figures on atrial septal defect and holes in the heart might be a bit rubbery, which is a separate discussion. But if we just accept those figures, now the latest figures, Tennessee is up there as well. Now, Kentucky and Tennessee are right by each other, right there in the Midwest. Okay, between have the Cumberland River. Now, I never visited the area, but I'm told that there's plains and they had vast tobacco farms. Now, so if the U.S. Farm Bill has worked and the tobacco farms are replaced by cannabis farms, then what these states now have, off the top of my head, and this is a little bit vague, but very high rates of atrial septal defect, right? You're talking about 400, 500, 600, 700 per 10,000. The worst that's been reported from the US is 884 in Nevada per 10,000. That's nearly 1 in 11 babies has a hole in the heart, right? And when I go to Nevada on Google Earth, what I see is a weed shop on every corner, and that worries me. But if you look at the rates of cannabis use in Tennessee and Kentucky, you do not see high rates of smoked cannabis in the national surveys, which is the National Survey of Drug Use and Health conducted by SAMHSA every year, right? And it's a very famous survey. It's been running for 20, 30 years. But you do not see. But the point is they've got these high rates of holes in the heart, or apparently have high rates of holes in the heart. So the point is that in those states, it's not smoked cannabis doing it. But does it need to be, right? If you've got thousands, and presumably, like in those Kentucky and Tennessee, there must be a lot of flat land. You've got thousands of acres sowed to cannabis. What is the cannabinoid concentration of the Cumberland River between the two states, and has anybody measured it? And does it go up when it's dry? Because the point is, if you've got thousands of acres, just as we can contaminate our Murray-Darling system in Australia by giant cannabis farms, if you've got thousands of acres sown to cannabis, Kentucky, Tennessee, or in California, and I know about the north of California, and they've got massive growth. And California, the north of California is famous in JAMA, which is the German American Medical Association, for autism and gastroschisis. So it's famous for autism, gastroschisis, and cannabis. Now, gastroschisis is where the babies are born with their guts hanging out, for people who aren't, right? So autism is retarded brain development to a varying severity. Some are severe, some are mild, right? But see, with cannabis, like Nora Volkoff is the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which is one of the 29 institutes and centers at NIH. She has published many times that cannabis reduces the size of the head, the baby's head, right? The CDC says that cannabis is linked with anencephaly, which is no brain. Now, if a baby is born without a brain, they often die in uterus, because you can imagine, not very healthy, but maybe they live for half an hour, maybe they live for an hour, maybe they live for a day, and then it's over, right? And the CDC figures show that it's also linked with microcephaly, which is a small brain, which is the Zika virus problem. Now, you think about it, we had a public health emergency declared by Zika virus because it was causing microcephaly. But when we publish and say, no, cannabis is linked with microcephaly, the answer is, oh, no, it's all good because it's weed. But the point is, you have a spectrum now. You have a spectrum, right? Between every 2 years, the IQ drops by 2 points, which is a lot across the whole population, because you're literally dumbing down your population because they're not using it, they're losing it. Then you've got Dr. Volkoff saying the heads are smaller of the babies. Then you've got studies from the US and Europe showing microcephaly is linked. And then you've got the CDC saying no brain is linked with cannabis. So there's a spectrum. And obviously, the more weed you smoke, the more damage you get. And if you look at some of the photos that we published in some of my talks online about the sperm and the damage and the cannabis, you can see why. This is just garbage in, garbage out. You put garbage sperm in, you get garbage sperm out. In fact, we talked about sperm, let's talk about eggs for a minute, right? There's a guy called Morishima who worked at the NIH in 1984, he published, and he looked at egg cells, like the lymphocytes. And because obviously we all know where babies come from, eggs and sperm fertilize, and they divide, and out comes a baby. That's how you make a baby. And what Morishima showed, when you get these cannabis-exposed eggs, with one cell division, 20% of the cells are dead. How are you going to make a baby when 20% of the cells die with every cell division? It's not going to happen, right? And so the fertility rate is lower on the cannabis exposed, and the malformation rate is much higher, and the inborn errors are much higher. So if you ask me how are we exposed, I am extremely worried, especially in dry climates like the north of California, and especially where there's vast cannabis farms, like in Tennessee and Kentucky, and a river like the Cumberland River. I'd love to know what's going on in the Cumberland River. And even the Mississippi, because you go downstream the Mississippi, Louisiana's got high rates of atrial septal defect. That's down south. And Mississippi and Missouri have, and Missouri doesn't have high rates of smoked cannabis, but I have seen online, in the Wall Street Journal no less, these amazing pictures of Missouri's cannabis farm. And I think is one of the places where NIDA had their farms. Missouri and Mississippi is where they grew their cannabis, right? And now they've got rates of atrial septal defect, right? But the Wall Street Journals of the cannabis farms in Missouri are amazing. It's like 3 tiers. It's like a hotel. It's a cannabis hotel. It's growing at 3 levels. It's amazing. These highly potent things. And then you look at the atrial septal defect things off the Richter scale, 400 and 500 per 10,000. If it's not, the point is that environmental exposure may be much bigger than what we've understood. So as the environmental exposure rises, these are major genotoxic threats which no one's talking about, no one's thinking about.